John, thank you very much for your keynote presentation and thank you for running the lab just now. Um,
You're welcome. Happy to do it.
let us start the interview by you just briefly explaining who you are, um, what kind of your occupation is, and where you're based.
I'm John Mullins. I'm an associate professor at London Business School in London, of course. I study entrepreneurs and what makes them tick and what makes their businesses grow. And I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and their teams to help them find ways and learn new tools to help their businesses grow faster.
Now you're coming from the entrepreneurship world,
I
and
am.
then meeting the corporate world. Many of the things can be learned from the entrepreneur ship world, I think, in the corporate world. One of the things is break the rules is one of the principles that you've been associated with in your research. Break the rules doesn't resonate so well with some of the folks in the corporate world. How do you think these two things go hand in hand or can be understood?
Well, when I titled the book "Break the Rules," I didn't title it "Break the Laws." I said "Break the Rules," and what I mean by that is there are many sort of the way we do things around here that have grown up in business over many years. They grow up in particular businesses, but they grow up in business more generally. And many of those best practices, as big companies call them, are things that stand in the way of innovation. And entrepreneurs, I've discovered, uh, do many of those things very differently. And there are these six mindsets that entrepreneurs have that pretty much fly in the face of things we've been taught to do in successful big companies. And so the thrust of that work now is to help big companies see that maybe they can break some of these rules, if you want to call them rules, and do things differently in order to move ahead. Um, Otherwise, they are destined for the dustbin.
If you compare entrepreneurs with what I would call intrapreneurs, a term like for people innovating within the corporate world, how would you compare these two profiles or these two personalities or business personalities in the different contexts?
Well, it's interesting. When I left the world of business, which I was in for 20 years in the retailing industry in the USA, uh, one of the first things I did when I entered a PhD program was to try and figure out, okay, what's known about these entrepreneurs and the differences that there are between entrepreneurs and other business people. And there was a ton of research done in the 80s and 90s when entrepreneurship kind of got on the radar in business schools. And that research tried to address the question you've just asked. So what's the difference between an entrepreneur and another successful business person? And there were dozens and dozens of studies, and the sum total of all of that work was we can't find any differences. So for every introvert, there's an extrovert. For every PhD doing some rocket science startup, there's a poorly educated immigrant doing another kind of business that's working well. And whether they're in a big company or whether they're entrepreneurs, all that research said there just aren't any differences. The same kind of person here can also be over here. And yet, I knew from my own experience that entrepreneurs are different. So a couple of years ago, I set out to take a fresh look at that question that you've asked. And what I discovered is they are different in terms of these six mindsets about which I've written this book, Break the Rules. And it's those mindsets that predetermine how they respond to situations or opportunities that come their way. And they respond differently than a person in a bigger organization would. And that's why entrepreneurs are able to accomplish what they can accomplish. It's why they can challenge assumptions. It's why they can overcome or skate around obstacles. It's how they mitigate risk. It's a big deal, but it's all up here, interestingly. It's not in the personality, it's not in the education, it's not in the years of business experience, it's not in their drive, it's in their mindsets.
Now, you kind of identified these six different traits, I would call
They're
them,
not
or
traits,
mindsets.
they're
Yeah,
mindsets.
mindset. What would you say would be one of the ones that would be most beneficial to look at from a corporate innovation perspective? Would there be one that you'd say this would be the first go-to one?
Um, so that's a question I address in the last chapter of the book. So in the last chapter, I say, okay, so now you've learned what these six mindsets are, and you've seen examples of entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and others who are similarly successful, but much less well known. And you've seen examples of those people pursue these or put to work these mindsets and with great effect. But the question is, okay, now, so what can we do with them? And I think it depends where you start. But if you're starting from a position in a big company, maybe you're the leader of that company, or maybe you're somewhere deep down in an innovation unit in that company, and you want to put these six mindsets to work. There's one of them that I think is really difficult to do in a corporate setting, and that is the notion of don't ask permission, just go off and do it. And if you have problems, you can beg forgiveness later. Entrepreneurs do that all the time. That's why we have Uber, right? Um, but you can't do that in a big organization. But that's the only one that you can't do. The other five are each a mindset that enables you to respond to a particular thing might happen. So it's not that you take one of them and say, oh, I've got a hammer now and I got to look for nails that this hammer is gonna hit. You've got five mindsets, five tools, if you want to think of them that way, that you can apply when the right circumstance comes along.
When I looked at these mindsets, the one, yes, we can, which is also the first one, um, was appealing to me, also resonating very well with some of the great founders in startups that can create that vision to kind of pull a whole team and then later an organization into a specific direction. What do you think some of the people working in innovation, in R&D, or in innovation units in corporates can learn from these visionaries in the startup world and in relation to this, yes, we can? How can you create that momentum or that vision or that energy to pull your team through or motivate them?
I think at its root cause, it's the ability to be a really good storyteller. I mean, I think of Elon Musk and what he's accomplished in the multiple businesses he runs. And what he's really done is tell stories about his vision for the future and how it's possible that if you join with him in his journeys to get there, there's a chance he'll be successful. And I think it's fair to say that single-handedly, Musk has put electric vehicles on the map. We wouldn't be where we are today in EVs more broadly without what he's done at Tesla.
Let me let me challenge you a little bit on the one that mindsets can be learned. And I think also in the book you refer to that a lot of our education has been kind of biased towards following rules and going like a path that it has been structured, and we've been trained in a very specific way of not thinking so much freely left and right, and begging and borrowing and breaking rules, etc. All of what it encompasses to be a good or some of the successful founders. Um, this is deeply rooted within us over such a long period of time, especially if you have been in a business career for 10, 15, 20 years or longer. How is it possible to change some of these mindsets in a way towards yes, we can, and etc.
Yeah, I think it's an individual matter. Um, it will probably surprise you to know that there's some research that shows that there are more founders that get funded in Silicon Valley who are older than age 50 than there are younger than age 25. Isn't that a remarkable thing? So those people work for, if they're 50, they've worked maybe for close to 30 years in a business, and they've been through exactly what you just described. And yet here they are with an opportunity they want to pursue, and perhaps their employer doesn't want to pursue it. Or perhaps they're in Silicon Valley where the pursuit of opportunity is just in the air you breathe. But for whatever reason, they say, you know what, I'm going to go do this myself. And off they go. So I don't think there's anything that in our educational system has been knocked out of us that can't be changed. I think we all have it in us to be an entrepreneur, but we have to have the right spark, the right catalyst. Maybe we have to find the right problem to solve, and then if we have enough passion to solve that problem, then we can go. I'm not worried about what we've been taught or not taught or whatever at school. I don't think it's a problem.
When you think about some of these mindsets in the large corporate context, what would be some of the risks? I mean, you mentioned the risk of not following rules or not asking for permission. That this was one that was very difficult. What are some of the other risks you would see in pursuing some of these 6 mindsets in the corporate context to start with?
Honestly, I don't think there are any risks in pursuing opportunity by using these 6 mindsets. So it certainly isn't risky to look for problems you can solve rather than new products you can develop. We need to focus on customer problems, not think about products and how to tweak them. There's no risk in doing that. We need to look at very narrow target markets rather than huge target markets, because when you have a narrow target market, you can develop something that is acutely tuned to the people in that target market, just as Philip Knight did when he created Nike, making shoes for elite distance runners. There's no risk in applying these mindsets. It's a matter of courage and thinking about, gee, there's no reason why this shouldn't happen in big companies. It's just that we've learned that we don't do it that way. But there's no reason why not, and there's no risk to doing so.
When I put another keyword into the discussion, which would be leadership, what do you think is important in terms of leadership when you think about these mindsets?
For me, one key role of a leader in an organization is to give people freedom to pursue that which they think can make a difference. And these days, increasingly, we're seeing that people, especially young people, want to make a difference in their work. They want to make the world a better place in some small way or another. And that's really what entrepreneurs do. Almost every entrepreneur I know is an entrepreneur because he or she sees a problem to solve. And if he or she can solve that problem, that part of the world, that little corner of the world, will be a better place in some way. That's what entrepreneurs do. I don't see any reason why we can't lead like that in big companies as well.
If you would put yourself into the shoes of trying to adopt some of these mindsets in a large company setting, what would be one of the first steps you would go to and you would consider and trying implementing?
Well, again, it's not companies that are going to adopt the mindsets. It's individual human beings that are going to adopt them. So if I'm working in an innovation unit, maybe in a big company, and I see that my company's efforts to innovate are all about product innovation, but they're not really looking at customers and trying to find customer problems that their skills could solve, then I'd start saying, let's spend some time getting close to customers anthropological research is a good way to do that. And let's learn what customer problems have in the area where we do business. And maybe we'll find some new problems that we didn't think we could solve, but perhaps we can. So it's a matter of taking each of these mindsets and seeing, we as an individual, can we take a given one of these mindsets, put it to use to make some progress toward things that we want to get done.
Last question. When you think about that research, what was something that was one of the most important lesson for you, or mind-boggling when looking into it? Also, maybe challenging your own perception before a real surprise, kind of.
It's a really good question. I think it didn't come to me as a surprise that these mindsets are what makes the difference between entrepreneurs and other successful business people. I knew in my heart, from having been an entrepreneur 3 times, from having studied literally thousands of entrepreneurs and worked with thousands of entrepreneurs over the last 20 years in my role as a professor at LBS, I knew in my heart, and I could see with my own eyes, that they're different. But the question was for me, well, can I take a fresh look at this and see if I can really identify what those differences are? And that's where the research led me. So there wasn't a surprise. I knew the conclusion, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to find that was going to support that conclusion that I already knew, that entrepreneurs indeed are different. My question was, how are they different? And I now know the answer.
John, thank you once again for your keynote presentation. Thank you for the lab. And of course, thank you for joining me in this pleasant and interesting conversation.
You're welcome, Leonard. Fun to be here. Thanks.